Hilchas Tumas Meis, Perek Shnei Moser. From here onwards, in the next 5-6 prakim, the Rambam is going to be discussing the dinim of Tumas oil. Now, we learned earlier that Tumas oil of a messes, Matame oil, is in one of three ways. Either the person is mile on the mess, or the mess is mile on the person, or the person and the mess are both under one oil. That was the three ways of Tumas oil. Now, if a person is being mile on a mess, or the mess is being mile on the oil, there's no shiurim how big the mess has to be. It has to be a shear that could be matame b'oil, and as long as the person is on top of this mess, which is matame b'oil, or the mess is on top of the person, which is matame b'oil, so either way, the person becomes tummy b'oil. The person becomes tummy b'oil, or the keli becomes tummy b'oil. That's this din of tumas oil, b'negeh those two things. B'negeh the din of the mess and the person, or the keli, are sitting under an oil, so that in order for the oil to cause that the tumah should spread, in other words, what's happening is the mess is under an oil together with a keli or a person, so the mess causes that the tumah spreads under this oil, and anything that's in this oil becomes tummy, that's susceptible to tumah. That's susceptible to tumah. So in order for that oil to be called an oil, there's a t'nai. The shear is that the oil has to be at least a tefach by a tefach big. In other words, it has to be a tefach by a tefach. The width and the length is a tefach, and it has to be a tefach above the ground in order for it to be considered an oil. In other words, if it's less than a tefach above the ground, so that's not called that it's being mild. That means it's like almost touching. So in order for it to be considered an oil, it's halachal mesh misinai, the dinim of oil. So with all the shiurim halachal mesh misinai. So the din of oil, in order for it to be considered an oil, it has to be a tefach al tefach. That's the size of it, the shatach. And the height has to be at least a tefach above the ground. A tefach above the ground, that's called an oil. And then everything that's under it, the tumah spreads under the entire oil. And since the tumah spreads under the entire oil, so anything that's in that oil that's susceptible to tumah gets tumah. That's this din of oil. Now, an oil also is that it also, besides the fact that an oil causes that everything under the oil should be makabel tumah, it also causes that anything that's above the oil shouldn't be makabel tumah, which means that normally when you have a mess, so anything that would be directly above the mess, so the din would be tumah bikaz ve'ela bikaz ve'yeredus, because that's being mile al mess. Whereas the tumah goes up of the mess, or the tumah goes down of the mess, and memela the tumah bikaz ve'ela bikaz ve'yeredus. An oil causes that the tumah shouldn't go above the oil. So in other words, if you have a mess in a room, and there's a ceiling on top of the room, so if someone is on the room on top of that, so he's not makabel tumah, because lepel, the oil prevents the mess, for the tumah of the mess going up. And al derech zeh, if you have a mess above the room, and now you have something under the room, so again, the oil protects the mess from the tumah of the mess going down. If there's no oil, so then it would be tumah bikaz ve'ela bikaz ve'yeredus. Anything that's directly above the oil, and anything that's directly below the oil would become tummy. Mashing through the oil causes that the tumah shouldn't go up and go down. We'll learn inside. Perek Shnei Moser. Tefach al tefach meruba, al rum tefach, a square tefach al tefach, and also the height that's above the ground or whichever area that is being mile on, al rum tefach, is mevius atumah, that causes that the tumah should spread under the oil, and also the choitzitz b'fnei atumah din teira, and it causes that the tumah shouldn't go up beyond the oil, which even though a mess normally, as we said before, bikaz ve'ela bikaz ve'yeredus, but an oil causes that the tumah under the oil should spread, and it causes that the tumah shouldn't go beyond the oil. Now, she'ein kori oil, what's called an oil? Ela tefach al tefach b'rum tefach. Oh, yes, Raza. Whereas in order for the area to be called an oil, it has to be the t'nai, again, an oil tuzuf, that it's mevius atumah, it causes everything under the oil to become tummy. It's chaytzis b'mfnei atumah, it blocks the tumah from going above the oil, but on the condition that it's called an oil. What's called an oil? An oil is called an tefach al tefach b'rum tefach. Ketzat. Gezayis min hames munach laver. You have a gezayis min hames under the munach laver means it's not under a roof. Ubetzidei kelim kigei machtem betzineres ukriyetzebem, and ve'enom neigim betumah, and these kelim and machtem aren't touching the mess. Is I say imhel aleim oil. Because we're talking about a place outside, but if there was an oil on top of these kelim and the mess, And the oil was yesh bei tefach al tefach. The size of the oil was a tefach by a tefach. And v'hoye govea min ha'oretz tefach. And it was above the ground tefach. It doesn't have to be above the mess tefach. It doesn't have to be above the kelim tefach. It's above the ground the tefach. So the din is hareze maybe satum lekelim utmeim. So the kelim become tummy. Now that's din number one. Now that's the din that an oil is maybe satum. An oil which is a tefach al tefach berum tefach is maybe a tumah. Now hoyach kelim acherim al gabi oil zeh sheyesh b'tefach al tefach. So under the oil there was a mess, and there was other kelim on top of this oil. Is a rein teir. Why? The oil choitzes b'noma v'natuma, because the oil separates, blocks the tumah from going up. Hinu l'madato she'shem sha'oil metame kol shetachto. The oil affects that everything under the oil, the tumah should spread out. Is also matzel kol shechutzalei. It also is matzel anything that's above the oil, that's outside the oil. And the choitzes, and it's choitzes bein hatumah u'bein hakelim shal gava, between the tumah and the kelim shal gava. That's so here we're talking about the tumah was under the oil. So everything that was under the oil became tummy, any kelim that were under the oil became tummy, and anything that's above the oil is tor. There was a mess on top of an oil, and the kelim tachtav and the kelim were under this oil, so the din is a kelim teirim. Again, even though they're directly under the mess, because the din is shah oil chaytzis b'fnei atumah, because the oil is chaytzis b'fnei atumah. That's all talking about if there's an oil that's berum tefach. It's a tefach al tefach berum tefach. Now, haya ha'oil pachis berum tefach. The oil wasn't a tefach above the ground. A pachis mitefach al tefach, or the dimensions of the oil were less than a tefach al tefach. Aval pishu gaver kamet tvachim. Even though the height may be above the ground many tvachim, but the dimensions of the oil is less than a tefach al tefach. So the din is azay hakelim shebisad atumateir. If you have kelim together with a mess under this oil, which is less than a tefach al tefach, or less than the height of a tefach al tefach, so they're all torah. And the kelim shalamaylam oil there, however, the kelim which are on top of this oil is kol shekeneged atumah tummy. So anything that's directly above the tumah, even though it's standing on this oil, but it doesn't have a din of an oil. So since it doesn't have a din of an oil, so it doesn't accomplish what an oil does to be metame, and it doesn't accomplish what an oil does to be metame. The kelim shalamaylam oil there. Ishol keneged atumah tummy, mipnei shehilu al atumah, because these things that are keneged atumah are being mile on the oil. That's tumas oil. That's what we learned before. That's one of the forms of tumas oil. And over there's no shiurim b'negea if a chayfetz is mile or a person is mile on the mess. Ve'in shom oil lochas b'fnei atumah, and there's no oil to prevent the tumah from going up. That's v'chein im hoyse tumah al gabi oil zeh. If there was tumah on top of this oil which doesn't have a din of an oil because it's less than a tefach ha-tefach, or because it's not a tefach above the ground, and the kelim tachtav and they're kelim directly under this tumah is kol shekeneged tumah tummy. Why aleim? Because since these kelim were mile on this, the tumah was on top of this oil and the kelim were under it, so the tumah was being mile on the kelim. Ve'ein shom oil sheyachas b'fnei atumah, and there's no oil because shekol pachas mirum tefach is kinegi o chashiv. Anything that's pachas mirum tefach is considered as if it's touching the ground. In other words, an oil means something that's being mile on the ground. So if there's at least a tefach between the oil and the ground, so you could say it's being mile on the ground. Masha'ingan, if it's less than a tefach above the ground, it's like touching the ground, and therefore the tumah shetacht of tumah retzutzi, it's pressed tumah. It's not tumah which is under a nail. And therefore the tumah is because va'ela because v'yeredus. Now that's a straightforward din. There's a din saying nochamal. An oil is maybe satum and choytze b'fnei atum. That's din number one. Din number two is that in order for an oil to be an oil, so it has to be a tefach al tefach berum tefach. So if it's a tefach al tefach berum tefach, so it's maybe satuma and choytze b'fnei atuma. If it's not a tefach al tefach berum tefach, so not it's not maybe satuma and it's not choytze b'fnei atuma. Period. Now, by medvar mamurim, this din that it's either maybe satum and choitzes b'fnei atuma, or it's neither. That's by medvar mamurim b'shalei hoya ha'adam oil lekelim. If the oil wasn't made up of a person or kelim, aval odim kelim shenasu oil ala tuma. If a person or kelim became became an oil ala tuma, bein shehoyu hein atzmei. Whether the kelim and the odom, they were the actual oil, the covering was made out of an odom or kelim, or bein shehayu amudi ha'oil, even if they weren't the actual oil, but they were holding up the oil. Afilu hayu kelim she'im mekabel tuma kolikar, even we're dealing with kelim, which aren't really mekabel tuma, but nevertheless, if these kelim are the ones that are holding up this oil, so there's a new din, is harei elu mevinus atuma. So pale, anything that's under this oil becomes tummy, even though the oil is made up of kelim or an adam, or the oil is being supported by an adam or kelim. However, ve'enom chaitzim b'fnei atuma. That they're not chaitzim b'fnei atuma. Normally, an oil does two things. First of all, it's mevius atuma, and it's chaitzim b'fnei atuma. Is an oil which is made up of an adam or kelim, or even if the adam or kelim are supporting the oil, so then it's mevius atuma. It's a regular din of oil legabe mevius atuma. But on the other end, there's this chumrah that it's not choitzes b'fnei atuma. Ketzad, what would be the example? Luach shehoye munach al gabi arbo bnei adam. There are 4 people that are holding a plank of wood, a piece of wood, al gabi arbo kelim, or this luach is standing on top of 4 kelim. Afilu klei avonim u'kiyetzebem. Even we're talking about kelim she'ein, which are klei avonim she'ein luminam tumah. Ve'ein tzarich leimar. Of course, im hoye munach al arbo shpudim or arbo kanim, which arbo shpudim means like a shpud is a keli of a spit, which is made out of metal. The arbo kanim vices are also made out of metal. We're talking about kelim that are mekabel tumah, shegveim tefach, and therefore they're supporting the oil. Now we have an oil, so we have an oil that's above the ground, a tefach, that's being supported by these kelim. The kelim are the kelim which are b'chlal na mekabel tumah, and certainly if the kelim are mekabel tumah. Now v'hoisa tumah v'kelim tachtov, and you have tumah v'kelim tachtov, so you have an oil above them, so kelim tmeim. The kelim are tmeim because the kelim are tumah, because the oil is maybe is atumah. However, v'imhoyu kelim al gabov, if there were kelim al gabov, so here is a chidush that afilu shlei keneged atumah tmeim. Whereas this oil is not choitzes b'fnei atumah, but on the other end the oil is maybe is atumah. So therefore, this oil. So on one end, you have on the right you have a mess, and on the left you have kelim. So since this oil, which is made out of adam or kelim, or is being supported by adam or kelim, is maybe satuma, so it's as if the entire oil is full of tumah. The oil is full of tumah. Now, if there'll be kelim on top of the mess, so versteht the mess is because ve'ela because ve'yeredes. Why? Because lepel kelim are not chaytzis b'mnei atumah. But over here, the chiddush is that even if the kelim that are on the top of the oil are not going to be keneged amez, they'll also become tummy. Why? Because since lepel, there was a mess under this oil, and that mess caused that the tumah of the mess should spread under the entire oil, and now there's nothing stopping from the tumas mess to go up, because lepel, this oil is made out of a keli, was being supported by a keli. So therefore, it causes that everything that's on top of this oil, even that's not keneged ames, also becomes tummy. That's the word. That's the hoyse nochmo. We're gvoyim tefach. V'hoyse tumah v'kelim tachtiv. Is a kelim tmeim. That's poshut. Nochmer of them hoyu kelim al gabov. Now if the kelim were al gabov, I feel shlei keneged atumah. Even if it's not keneged atumah, it's tmeim. That's talking about this way. That if you have tumah tachtov, so all the kelim on top, even shlei keneged atumah tumah. And the other way, fakir is also. If there was a tumah al gabi al luach, and the kelim tachtiv, and there were kelim under the luach, is called kelim shtachas al luach tmeim. Everything that's under the kelim that's tmeim, that's tmeim, and bepashtus it means also that's not keneged atumah. That's not keneged atumah because lepel the tumah comes down. The tumah because v'yered, it goes through the oil because the oil is not stopping the tumah from going down. And once it goes down, it's present under the entire oil. That's talking about if the luach is on top of kelim or on top of people. Not on kelim, but on avonim. So then, kelim shall gabav te'erim, because lepel the tumah doesn't go up, because lepel the oil is chaytzid b'fnei tumah unless it's being supported by an adam or kelim. Now, in this case that we said before, that if the tumah was al gabi al luach, and the luach is being supported by kelim or people, and the kelim are tachtov, so all the kelim shetachas al luach are tmeim, which means certainly all the kelim which are tachas al luach, even shalei keneged tumah, as we said before, because since the tumah goes under the luach, so maybe it spreads throughout the luach. So the Ramar brings from the Rosh that then once it goes under the Luach, so then it also goes above the Luach. So when it comes out that all the Kalim that are on top of the Luach are also Tamei. So Nachmal, you have a Tumah on top of a Luach, and that Luach is standing on top of Kalim or top of people. So that Tumah goes down under the Luach. Goes down under the Luach because the Luach is not stopping it. And Memela, once it goes down under the Luach, so any Kalim that are under the Luach become Tamei. And then the Ram doesn't say this, but then the Rosh says that then that tumah which came down from on top, the tumah that was on top of the luach came down because the keli wasn't stopping it, so now it goes back up above the luach. The Maisa, the Rambam doesn't say that. That says in the Rosh, but the Rambam himself doesn't say that. The Rambam only says that the keli which is stuck as a luach becomes tumah. Halacha Beis. Now Halacha Beis bemis is behemshich to the end of Halacha Aleph. The Rambam is saying avam haluach hayamunach al gabi avonim. Al gabi behema v'chaya v'hoisu tumah tachtov hari hakelim shal gabav teirim hoisu tumah al gabav, so then hari kol hakelim shetachtov teirim, because sha'oil chitz b'fnei atumah, because since this luach is not on top of kelim and not al gabi odom, but it's rather al gabi avonim, so memela, so therefore this oil is chitz b'fnei atumah. So if there was tumah al gabav, so anything that's under the luach is tor. Now then the Rambam continues further, uklei glolim uklei avonim uklei adoma, which is haboim b'midah, is areim keiholim. We learned that there is a din of a kli'etz abo b'midah. Kli'etz abo b'midah, b'amas a kli'etz is mekabel tumah, but when it's a kli'etz abo b'midah, it's not mekabel tumah. Now a klei glolim, klei avonim, klei adoma, mechatchila not mekabel tumah. But nevertheless, since they're kelim, so we said before that causes that they're not choitzes b'fnei atumah, even if they're supporting on oil, they're not choitzes b'fnei atumah. So now we're saying that klei glolim and klei avonim, klei adoma, which is boim b'midah, they're large to the extent that they're boim b'midah and levashal and eitz. A kli eitz wouldn't be makabel tumah because it's not dum yilasak. So when it comes to kli glolim, klei avonim, anyways they're not makabel tumah. But over here the chiddush is that they don't have a din of a keli. That they don't have a din of a keli. And that din really applies to eitz as well. The Rambam will say behemshel that by eitz also kli eitz abo b'midah doesn't have a din of a keli. Legabi this din, that's not makabel tumah. That we learned already. But over here, the chiddush is that it's all. We know that even kelim that are not mekabel tumah could have a din of a keli. Legabe, that it's not considered an oil which is chaytzes b'fnei atumah, or if it's supporting an oil, so that oil is not a chaytzes b'fnei atumah. But here the chiddush is that when we're dealing with klei glolim, klei avonim, klei adoma, which are boim b'midah, al derazeh, we'll learn later, b'negei klei eitz, so the hareim keiholim, they don't have a din of a keli, they have a din of an oil, and therefore veinam kekelim, uleficha chaytzim b'fnei atumah, they are chaytzes b'fnei atumah. So the Nekudas Advarim that we're learning over here, that there's a metzias of something which is maybe is atuma, but it's eini chaytzes b'fnei atuma. Halacha Gimel. Neser shu nosun al pi tanur chodesh. You have a plank of wood, which is on top of it, which is not a keli, and it's on top of a tanur chodesh, on top of a new tanur. A new tanur means it wasn't yet heated, and therefore it doesn't really have a full din of a keli. It's not a din of a keli. Now v'oidef mikol tztodu b'piseach tefach. This neser is sticking out of this tanur chodesh from all sides. So haisa tumah tachas haneser. So if there was tumah under the neser, is kelim shal gabav tehirim. The kelim which on top of the neser are tahir. Why? Because lepel there's a chtzitza. The oil is chaytzes b'fnei atumah. It has a din of an oil, and memela it's maybe it's atumah, and it's also chaytzes b'fnei atumah. It's sitting on a tanur. And l'chura tanner is a keli? The answer is no, because since this tanner wasn't yet heated up, so it doesn't really have a full din of a keli. It doesn't have a proper din of a keli. Since it doesn't have a din of a keli, so memela it is chaytzes b'fnei atumah. That's what he's saying. How is that tumah tachas haneser is kelim shal gabav teirim? How in tumah al gabav is kelim shal tachtav teirim? Why? B'pnei shetanur chodesh eini kikelim l'inyan zeh. A tanur chodesh doesn't have a din of a keli because the tanur wasn't heated yet, so it's not really properly ready to be used. Because still the softness. But if it was old, which means it was already heated up before, so then hakil tummy, everything is tummy. Everything under the neser is tummy, and everything on top of the neser is tummy. In other words, everything is tummy. Why? Because it's maybe it's atuma, but it's any chetzes b'fnei atuma. So maybe if there's tumah on top, so everything on bottom would be tummy, and there's tumah on the bottom, so everything on top would be tummy. The tumah on the bottom, so everything on top would be tummy. Because lepel it's maybe it's atuma, and then everything goes up. Halacha dalet. Neser shuhu nosun al pi shnei tanurim, afilu yishonim. You have a board that's on top of two tanurim, which those tanurim have a din of a keli, they're yoshem. Ve'edif michutz l'taner zeh, in michutz l'taner zeh. So you imagine just take two cups and put something on top of the two cups, and that thing is extending out from the one cup to the outside, and to the other one also to the outside, and there's also an area in between the two cups. And this piece that's over these two cups, with Tanurim, this area is not extending on the sides of the cup. And those they extend on the two ends, but the piece that's over these two Tanurim are narrow, and it just goes over the Tanner. It goes over the Tanner, but it doesn't extend outside. Before in Halacha Gimel we had a Neser which was extending from all sides. Over here it's only extending from the outside sides. So we have like really three areas. We have the area that's extending, let's say, out on the right, all the way outside the Tanner on the right. We have also the area which is under the Neser, which is over that area between the two Tanurim. And then we have another area which is outside the left Tanner, which is a third area. And in between these three areas, we have these two Tanurim. We have the two Tanurim. Now, a Tanner is not mafsik b'fnei atuma as far as an oil is concerned. But if over here we're talking about from one area to the other area, the tumah, there's no way of the tumah spreading. Whereas if you have tumah under the outside area, so the inside area between the two Tanurim, and certainly the other area, which is outside the other Tanner, is not going to become tummy. That's what he's saying here. Neser shu noser al pishnei Tanurim. You have a board that's on top of two Tanurim. Afilu yishonim, where they're kalim. And ve'edif mechutz l'tanazeh, it extends outside both of the Tanurim. Not on the sides, but only on the outside. Now v'hoisa tuma tachtav, and there was tuma bein shnei Tanurim. The tuma was in between the two Tanurim, under an oil. So b'nei bulvat tummy, anything that's under that oil is tummy. Avol kelim shetachash te'aksav v'shechutz l'tanurim, the kelim which are outside this Tanner, outside this Tanner, is teherim sharing kishnei yolim. They're separate yolim. There's no way of the tumah going between from this area to that other area. There's the Tanner in between. And even though the Pasha L'chur is trying to say, even though the Tanner is a keli, but on the other end, that's not called being mafsik. The din that a keli is not mafsik is only when the mafsik upwards, but not sideways. Shareim kishnei yolim zeh b'tzad zeh v'chein neser shu noser al pi Tanner. If you have one Tanner, afilu yoshem, you have one Tanner and you have a neser extending from both sides of the Tanner, but not all around. And from this Tanner, this Neser is extending, let's say, to the right of Tefach and to the left of Tefach, but not to the sides. And the Tume b'tzad zeh is again, Kalim sheb'tzad hasheni teir. Why? Because it's two separate Deholim. The fact that there's a Tanner in between, so Memela Lepel Mamish, there's two separate Deholim, and therefore the Tume doesn't extend from one to the other. Halacha Hei. Adam shenosa keli kigei mardas u'kiyetzebei. A person is carrying a keli like a mardas, a plow, and there's something that's keli. It's long and it's round. It's like a round pole. U'kiyetzebei, a keli. Now vehel tzad keli ho'echad alatuma. Now this mardas went over a mess. It went over. It was mile on tumah. So memela this mardas became tummy. That's nothing to it. Mardas a keli. And since the mardas was mile on the keli, so memela the mardas becomes tummy. Now, im hoya behekefi tefach, if the mardas had a circumference of a tefach, is afal pi she'en berochbe el reichev etzba u'shlish, even though if it has a circumference of a tefach, so the diameter is only going to be an etzba u'shlish, maybe a kagdoma. The din is that in order for an oil to be an oil, it has to be a tefach al tefach, berum tefach. So it has to be a tefach al tefach berum tefach. So if you have a flat surface, so you measure if it's a tefach al tefach. If you have something round and you want to know if this round item has a shetach of a tefach, so you measure it by taking the circumference. So Chazal say that you take the circumference of the round item, and once you establish circumference, we know that the diameter is a third of the circumference. So if the circumference is 3, so then the diameter is going to be 1. So the Mela, so the Chur, if you want to know, do you have a tefach, which is mile on the mess, which will also be metami the person mashal. Let's say a person is carrying something round, a mardas, which has a circumference of 3. So that means that there was something that was a tefach wide that was over a mess, and it's also over him because he's carrying it. So mainly he's tummy to masail. That's pashut. Now over here, it was only the circumference was only a tefach. So the diameter is a third of a tefach. A third of a tefach. A tefach has 3 etzbois. So a third of a tefach is 1 etzba and a third of an etzba. So be'emes it doesn't have a width of a tefach. So therefore it's not really metame b'oil. So this person that's carrying this mardas, say nachnami, the mardas became tummy to masail, and maybe the mardas touched him. So the mardas that touches him could also be metame him with a tumah, would be metame with a tumah. So ma'aseh, if the mardas became tummy to masail, so l'chura the mardas becomes cherev areu kechol. So it's the male it has a din of tumah shiva, and now the mardas touches him, so he's also tummy to shiva. The mardas, he becomes also tummy to shiva. So then you don't have to come on to any xeris. Then it's pashut that he is tummy to shiva. The problem is it's possible that the mardas became tummy to shiva, and he was wearing clothes. Pashut, he was wearing clothes. So the clothes that he's wearing became tummy to shiva because he was touching the mardas. But now he's touching that clothes. Now he's touching that clothes. He doesn't become tummy to shiva. He's only becoming tummy to maserif. Because they're takan avatuma, which became tummy to Shiva, but he only becomes a rishon l'tuma. So be'emes the shuras hadin is that he should only be toivel and then have a hair of shemesh, and that's it. Well, again, the mardas is going over the mess. So mardas became tummy, and now his shirt also became tummy because it was touching the mardas, and that memela becomes also tummy to Shiva. But he himself should become only tummy to Mazarif because lepel he's only a rishon l'tuma. But nevertheless, they will geyser that he should have a din of Tumas Shiva. That's the din, that he should have a din of Tumas Shiva, as if the Mardas was Matami him ba'oil. Even though Mardas is only, can't be Matami ba'oil, because Mardas is only an etzba and a third of an etzba wide. The diameter is only an etzba and a third of an etzba. So how does it become Tommy Yisrael? So it was a special Gzeira d'Rabban. Let's first learn the halacha again, and we'll go back again. Adam shenose keli kigei mardas u'kietzim. A person is carrying a keli, which is a round keli, which is like a mardas, let's say a plow. And vehel tzad keli echad al tumah was hanging over his back, and one side of it went over the tumah. So the din is imhoye be'kefi tefach. If the hekef was a tefach, the circumference was a tefach, is avol pishein baruch be'alerechet etzbo shlish. So obviously the diameter is not wide enough to have a din of tumas eil, because the diameter is only a third of that tefach, which is an etzbo shlish. Nevertheless, I raise him it was a special takon of the Rabbanon that the person that's carrying this mardeya should become tamid. Umevule tumim with the rain, and it brings him tumim with the rain that she have a din as if tumas eil. Shegozru al sheyesh be'kefi tefach, mishum sheyesh berach b'tefach. If it's berach b'tefach, so you would take be be'emes a din of tumas eil. So the Chacham who instituted that when it's berach b'tefach, when it's be'kefi tefach, it shows me tumas eil. That's only been again the person that's carrying the mardeya. A person was carrying the mardeya, and then the mardeya went over a mess, and there were other kalim under this mardeya. So there's no din, a new din, that something that's round and has a circumference of a tefach is maybe a satuma, tumasel. That's a special din only for a person that's carrying this mardeya. Person that's carrying this mardeya, and the mardeya is bekefi tefach, so then it's maybe a satuma. Any maybe a satuma lekelim shetachtov, or l'shar odem shiyayel aleim balatuma achiyeh bereichav tefach. Now, what was the reason for this takana? So we started mentioning before. Those be'emes, since it doesn't have berach b'tefach, which means it doesn't have a diameter of a tefach, so therefore it doesn't really maybe satuma. And therefore, even if it's round and it has be'kefi tefach, it's not maybe satuma. But over here, since it has be'kefi tefach, there's a concern that maybe someone's going to watch what's happening. You see like this. This mardeya has be'kefi tefach. And he's going to see that this person, even though it has be'kefi tefach, this person is not going to have to be table. He's going to have to be table because he definitely became tummy. The mardeya became tummy mess. The pastors, the mardeya that's a tummy mess was metame, the clothes that he was wearing, also the tumas mess. Now that clothes that he was wearing is going to metame him, but only tumas erev. So if he's going to be table, a person's going to see that, take a look, he was table, or he didn't have azor shlishi shvi. and there was a mardea, which that person might not know and see that it's hakefi tefach, and the male thing knew it as a din of tumas oil. It's hakefi tefach, and he's being tevel. So why is he being tevel? It must be because an oil is only matame in the ephon of tumas erev, not tumas shiva. So it'll come out from that person who'll start thinking, seeing this episode, that tumas oil is not matame tumas shiva. So Mamela, they instituted that in such a case he should taka be matame tumas shiva. But that's only in such a case, because over here he's becoming tummy. Mashaik, in a regular case where there's an oil, he's not becoming tummy. The din is that he's not becoming tummy. So no one's going to make such a mistake, because no one's going to see him being table. They're going to realize that he's not being table because he wasn't tummy to Maserif. He wasn't tummy b'klal to Maseil. But over here, where there was a tumaseil, in other words, there was a tumaseil, the mardeh was mile on the mess. And lepel, the person that was touching this mardeh through his kelim became tummy tumas erev. So there's a concern that someone's going to see it, is going to think he became tummy tumas oil, and the mela and tumas oil is not metame tumas shiva, it's only metame tumas erev. So therefore they instituted that in such a case he should have also tummy tumas shiva. Halacha vav. Aroines shalates shemanichen behemes hames. A coffin where you put a mess in. Einon kekever doesn't have a din of a kever. We learned before that a kever is metami. When you touch the kever, you mile on a kever, you metami. An aron is not a kever. A kever is only when you have a permanent structure that was built over the mess. Avol im yesh ben kisu la'aron v'ames gave a tefach. So it's chesetz. So those lepel, there's a mess there. So if there's no chatzitza, the mess is the because v'oila. But if lepel there's a tefach, in other words, you have the covering of the aron, and between the covering of the aron and the mess there is a tefach. So memela there's an oil. So therefore, when yesh ben kisi aron v'ames gave a tefach is chetzes. That's on a deraisa digga level. V'aimed al gabi aron is terminatera. So in other words, the aron doesn't have a din of a kever. So memela just a regular din. There's a mess lying there, and if there's an oil on top of this mess, how is there an oil on top of this mess? Because the covering of the aron is a tefach above the mess. So memela there's an oil lying above this mess. So the din is we learned till now that an oil is chaytzes b'fnei atuma. That's on a minatera digga level. Va'afal pi sherev alenis yesh b'mchol tefach. So and therefore, so the din should be that if you walk on top of an aron, so that covering of the aron should be chaytzes b'fnei atuma. Aber heil v'yesh ein shom chol tefach is gozro al kol ha'arein she'im chaytzes. They were gazer that the top of the aron is not chaytzes from the atuma, v'sheyam halach al gabi aron. Someone that walks on top of an aron should be kinegeh b'mesi b'kever, he becomes tummy. So that din, that oil is chaytzes from the atuma, b'negeh on aron, even though this top of the aron does have an oil, nevertheless, it's not chaytzes from the atuma. Now the Rambam, when he speaks about that there should be a chaytzes from the atuma by the covering of the aron, the Rambam says, yesh ben kisi aron v'ames gave a tefach. So in other words, when minatera would it have a din of an oil if between the kisi aron v'ames gave a tefach? Now before we learned that an oil doesn't have to be between the mess and the oil. As long as the oil is covering, is between the ground, the karka, and the oil, there could be a tefach. Even though above the mess it may be very little. It could be very little. And maybe even touching. It could be even touching the oil. But lepel, since the oil is above the karka, a tefach, so therefore as a shem oil. Over here, the Rambam says that in order for this oil ames, for this oil, the top of the aron should have a din of an oil on a minatera dika level, is because there's between the mess and the top of the aron a tefach. So the Mefarshim explained, because over here, since the mess is being placed in the aron on a permanent level, so Memela, so he's there. That's his place. So Memela, the fact that you're going to have a covering on the aron just above the bottom of the aron is already filled with the mess. In other words, the mess is a permanent part of that aron. So Memela, over here, you need taka that the oil should be a tefach above the mess. It's not enough that the oil should be a tefach above the kark of the aron, because the whole aron was filled with the mess, and he becomes like keilu part of the aron. So Memela, over here, in order for the aron to have a din, the covering of the aron to have a din of an oil, minatera, it has to be a tefach above the mess. Halacha zayin. Koira shenesuna mikaisel l'kaisel. If you have a beam from one wall to another, on top, and v'atuma tachta, and the tum is under this beam, is im yesh bo piseach tefach. If there's a tefach it's wide, this kaira is a tefach wide, is mevias atuma tachas kula, it causes that everything that under this kaira should become tamei. And v'chol hakelim v'yodem shetachteh tmei, any person or keli that's under his tamei. V'afal pi she'ena kula shav. So the chiddush of this halacha, because we learned this until now, the chiddush of this halacha that even if part of this kaira is not really a tefach, is not a tefach. Because you have an area which is a tefach al tefach, but part of this kaira becomes narrower. And part of it is less than a tefach. Is nevertheless, as long as part of the kaira is a tefach al tefach, so the part that's an extension of this oil also has a name of an oil. And they should say miktas oil because it's an extension of an oil. Because since it has a tefach al tefach, so therefore the rest of it, even the part that doesn't have a tefach al tefach, is considered an extension of the oil. However, if there's no piseach tefach, there's no area of the kaira that's a piseach tefach, so it's pasha tuma because ve'yired is commission beyond. What does the circumference have to be? What does it have to be be'kefa in order that there should be a piseach tefach? If it's round, like we learned before, that if if it's a tefach, the diameter is always a third of the circumference. That's the cheshbon that Chazal is mekabel based on psukim. Ubizman shehi merubas, and the time that it's merubas, which means it's square, so then it's arbot tefachim, which l'chur is like l'chur poshet. I know l'chur is not a chiddush. Obviously, if you have a beam which is square, so you have a flat surface which is a tefach. So you don't have to think what's neged to know how much is around the beam. L'chur what's neged to know that there's a flat surface of a tefach, and memela, if there's a flat surface that is a tefach, so memela we know that it's a tefach. Halacha ches. So shimuta al tzida ba'aver. So is like a barrel. It's a round barrel that's not lying upwards, but it's lying on its side, and it's a hollow. It's a barrel is hollow. Is eine mivias atum etachas kula ad sheyeh behekefa arbo tfachim umachzu bekiruv. So this is based on the halacha we're learning till now, that in order for an oil to have a din of an oil, it has to be that there should be an oil which is a tefach al tefach, and it should be berum tefach. Now if you have a barrel that's lying on its side, and it's hollow, now the question is if this barrel should have a din of an oil. Now in order for this barrel to have a din of an oil, it has to be that there is a tefach al tefach. Now the barrel is not flat, the barrel is round. So there should be an area which is a tefach al tefach, and that area should be berum tefach. So let's imagine that we have, let's say, a barrel that's exactly 3 tvachim in circumference, which means the diameter is a tefach. So if you're going to look at this barrel, the barrel is lying on its side, so the height of the barrel, when you look at the height of the barrel from the bottom, from the way it's lying on its side, the height of it from to the top of it of the side is a tefach. It's a tefach. But the width on top is not a tefach. The width on top is very little. There's no width, because the whole width in the middle of the barrel would be a tefach. So it would be like a width of a tefach over a half a tefach. So in other words, you take that barrel and you'd say where is it a wider tefach? It's wider tefach halfway into the barrel, because the barrel is a tefach by a tefach. The diameter upwards would be a tefach, and the diameter across would also be a tefach. It would be the same tefach. So in Mela, if you're going upwards, you want to know, you have a tefach wide, but a tefach wide is only above a half a tefach high. So Mela, now you want to have, it should be a tefach wide above a tefach high. So again, as you have a tefach, if you have 3 tvachim, it's not going to work. When will it work? So the Rambam is saying it'll work if the circumference is 4.5 tvachim. So then it's going to come out that it's 1.5 tvachim wide. 1.5 tvachim tall. So from the top to the bottom of this barrel, which is lying sideways, so you look at it. So the top to the bottom is 1.5 tvachim. The height is 1.5 tvachim. So now, if you're going to go down this height, and you're going to go down a half a tefach, so then the width of the barrel will still be a tefach. That's what the Rambam is saying. That the width of this barrel will still be a tefach. So then we'll have the width of the barrel at that point in time at the height of a tefach. Again, you're taking this tefach, you're going up, you cut it, you make a straight line from the lowest part of the barrel that's lying on its side to the highest part of the barrel. that's lying on its side. That's the diameter of the barrel. Now you go up this barrel a tefach, you're going up this line a tefach, and now you're going across. And you're going to, how much is it going to be from one side of the barrel to the other side of the barrel? So the Rambam is saying that it'll be a tefach. So then you'll have a tefach by a tefach, which is the barrel, the top of the barrel. The top of the barrel is round, but it's not negir. The round part that goes high is not negir. The point is that this area is a tefach by a tefach. In other words, if you'd imagine, bring it down, because that's the tefach by a tefach, and it's above the ground of a tefach. So maybe it's a tefach by a tefach above a tefach. That's this halacha. That's the first part of halacha ches. So sheimuta al tzida ba'aver. You have a saw that's lying on its side. Ba'aver. It's not lying up, right side up, but it's lying on its side. Is eine bevias atuma tachas kula. It doesn't have a din of an oil. Whereas it doesn't bring a tuma tachas kula. Achiye bekefer arbot fach memachza. Unless the circumference of this saw, of this round barrel, which is the size of a saw, whatever something again that's the size of a saw, it should be, the circumference should be 4.5 tvachim, b'kiruv, b'erech. Why? What's the inyan? Kedei sheyeh geva hatzad ha'elyon tefach u'machza. So basically, if you're going to go up, you're going to make a line straight up from the bottom to the top, it'll be tefach u'machza, from the bottom part of the barrel now that's lying on its side, to the top part of the barrel that's lying on its side. The mela, the year, tefach al tefach mimeno. So if a tefach al tefach from this barrel, you're going to go from one side of the barrel to the other side of the barrel, and you'll have a tefach from one side to the barrel, the other barrel, that'll be gavi malaretz tefach. It'll come out to be higher than the aretz tefach. So in other words, if you have a circumference of 4.5 tvachim, so maybe it comes out you have a diameter of 1.5 tvachim. So now when you're going to go up 1 tvachim, up this diameter, so then across the area there'll be a tefach, and Memela you'll be able, that'll be mile on the so it'll be a tefach mal tefach. So Memela v'yeh tefach al tefach mimenu govim al oras tefach lefichach. So therefore that's why we need that the circumference should be 3.5 tvachim lefichach im hoiso gvoyim al oras chatzi tefach. If this barrel is already elevated from the ground the chatzi tefach, so therefore it's already elevated from the ground the chatzi tefach. So let's imagine we have this barrel. That this barrel, let's say, will be 3 tvachim wide. And memela 3 tvachim wide, where will it have a tefach across? By the very middle. By the very middle. Now that very middle will be a half a tefach above the bottom. Because the diameter is the chatefach. So memela, if you go up a half a tefach, so then the area will be a tefach wide. That area which is in the middle, the very center of the, going from up to down, that's going to be a tefach wide. But the problem was that if it's lying on the ground, it's taka tefach wide, but it's only half a tefach tall. Masha'ekin, if it's already elevated above the ground by half a tefach, so all you need is that the circumference would be a 3 tvachim. If this saw was a half a tefach elevated above the ground, and and the circumference was 3, is mevias hatuma. So it's mevias hatuma, and the reason is because since the circumference is 3. So the diameter is a tefach. The diameter is a tefach, but the diameter is a tefach. If it would be lying on the ground, would be a tefach above a half a tefach. But since it's already elevated by half a tefach, so then it becomes a tefach over a tefach. Then it becomes a tefach over a tefach. A tefach over the half a tefach of itself, plus the half a tefach, which it is elevated above the ground. Yeah, that's din number 1. Now the Rambam is saying another din about an amud ogul. Now, before we were talking about a saw which was hollow. So you're making an oil within the saw, within this hollow barrel. So you need to have that the barrel should be wide enough in order to be able to create a tefach al tefach within this barrel. Masha'inkin, now we're talking about something that's solid. We have an amud, a beam, which is round, which is lying on the ground. Umunach al aretz. Now, the beam, since it's solid, so there's no oil in there. There's no oil in the beam. Now, however, since it's round, so there's the area under the circular part of it that's covered by knows it's not sitting solidly on the ground. It's a round structure. So it's the bottom where it's lying on the ground is lying on the ground, and then next to it there's an area which is under the rest of it, which is not lying on the ground. So you have, the question is, how big is that little area of that round part is the part where the circle doesn't actually touch the ground. So now we want to create over there a tefach al tefach. If you create a tefach al tefach under that area, that's going to be a tefach al tefach. So then you'll be able to be the tumah will extend under the entire area. But if there's no tefach al tefach there, so then there won't be a din of tumah, because tumah has to have, in order for it to be an oil, there has to be a tefach al tefach. So the question is, how round, how big does this amud ogel have to be to say that under the curvature, which is on the side, there is a tefach al tefach which you could set up, which is still under the amud. In other words, the part of the amud which is mistama taller than a tefach, but over there there's no tefach. There's no tefach white. There's no tefach white. There's part of the tefach which is a tefach wide, but it's not a tefach tall. You want to be able to have an area which is a tefach tall and a tefach wide, and it's all under the amud. You'll be able to put in under this amud, for example, you put a cube, which is a tefach by tefach, and it'll be under this curvature, which is under the amud, and it'll be completely under the amud. In other words, it won't be sticking out from the amud. It'll be completely under the amud, and it'll be inside, and it'll be a tefach by a tefach. So how big does this amud ogel have to be in order to be able to put under this curvature, this round area, this area which is under the amud, a tefach al tefach. So that the Rambam is saying, v'chein amud ogel, shul mutal la'aver, which is lying in the aver, no, it's not lying under a house. Umunach al haaretz, and it's lying on the ground. Is eini mevi tumah tachas dafne. It's not going to bring tumah under the walls of this amud, which is under that part, which like the circle, it doesn't, like the circular area under it. Ad sheyeh beherkef esrim barbot tvach. Unless this amud is 24 tvachim in circumference. But if there's no 24 tvachim of circumference, so then tumah because ve'ela because v'yeretz. So then the tumah is because ve'ela because v'yeretz. Again, in order that under this eagle, which means in the area which is not touching the ground, which is like, so to speak, above the ground, and in that area you should be able to put in a tefach al tefach, and it should be under the amud, under that amud ogel is only if you have a circumference of this amud that's 24 tvachim wide. Now the Rambam here is going to say the cheshbon of how the cheshbon is. So maybe we'll go through the cheshbon b'kitzur. Now there are pictures in the Rambams. We'll have pictures. We'll just say it over. Try to say it over the kitzur without a picture. The first thing is you have this eagle. You're trying to figure out whether or not this eagle has a tefach al tefach in that area where the eagle is not touching the ground. There's the empty space. And in that area, is there a tefach al tefach, berum tefach? And obviously it has to be under the eagle, under this amud ogel. Under this amud ogel, there should be a space which is a tefach al tefach, berum tefach. So the first thing you do is you make a square around the eagle. You make a square around the eagle. So now once you have a square around the eagle, so part of the square has the eagle in it, has this amud ogel in it, and then part of it is empty. Obviously part of the corners of this square is empty. Now the question is, in that empty part of the corner of the square, could you have a tefach al tefach berum tefach? That's really the issue over here. The issue is you have to have an eagle which is large enough that when you go ahead and make a square around this eagle, in that empty area of the square which is around the eagle, you'll be able to put in a tefach al tefach berum tefach. So now the cheshbon is azay. When you have an eagle, let's start with the cheshbon we have it here. You have an eagle that's 24 tvachim in circumference. Circumference is 24 tvachim. So then the diameter is 8 tvachim. The diameter is 8 tvachim. Now if you're going to make a square around this eagle, so the square around this eagle is going to be 8 by 8. The square is going to be the size of the diameter. So it'll be 8 by 8. So you're going to have an 8 by 8 square around this eagle. Now, what is the diagonal of an 8 by 8 square? What is the diagonal of an 8 by 8 square? The diagonal of an 8 by 8 square is greater, no, the diameter of this 24 tefach circumference is 8 tvach. the diagonal, that's the diameter of that eagle. Now the diagonal of this square, which is 8 by 8, is going to be, the cheshbon is that the diagonal is always 1 2/5 of each side of the square. That's the cheshbon. 1 2/5 of each side of the square. So if you have a square of a tefach by a tefach, so the diagonal is going to be a tefach and 2/5 of a tefach. There will be a tefach and 2/5 of a tefach. So if you're going to have 8 tvachim by 8 tvachim, so the diagonal of 8 tvachim by 8 tvachim is going to be 8 tvachim plus 8 times 2/5 of a tefach, which means 8 tvachim plus 16/5 of a tefach, which in other words means 11 1/5 of a tefach. That's going to be the diagonal of a square of 8 by 8. That's the cheshbon. So you can have a diagonal of a square of 8 by 8. Now if you're going to go ahead and go from the diagonal, in other words, you're going to go from one corner of this square to the other corner of the square, the diagonal corner of the square. So you're going to go through also the circle. Obviously, you're going to go through the circle, and you're going to cut through the circle in half. So you're going to have the diameter of the circle plus what's extra because it's the diagonal of the square. Now, the diagonal of the square is greater than the diameter of this circle of 24 tvachim circumference. How much greater is it going to be? So we're saying that the diagonal is going to be 3 1/5 tvachim greater than the diameter of the square. That's partial. That's what we're learning over here. So now if you say 3 1/5 tvachim greater than the diameter of the square, so how much is going to be sticking out from greater than the diameter of the circle? How much is going to be sticking out on each side? On each side is going to be sticking out. If you're saying it's 3 1/5 tvachim, so basically it'll be sticking out about 3 3 tvachim. It'll be sticking out to say if you divide 3 1/2, so it'll be 1 1/2 tvachim, and it'll knock a little bit. There'll be another little bit. In other words, there'll be 1 1/2 tvachim of a diagonal on each side. A diagonal of an extra 1 1/2 tvachim. In other words, the diagonal of the square of 8 by 8 is going to be sticking out from the circle 1 1/2 tvachim on each side, plus a little bit. Now, if you have a diagonal which is sticking out from this circle 1 1/2 tvachim, what kind of square could you go around and put around this diagonal? You could put a tefach by a tefach. If you have a tefach by a tefach, so then you have 1 2/5 tvachim diagonal. So over here you can have a little bit more really, because you can have 1 1/2 tvachim, maybe a drop more than 1 1/2 tvachim. So when you have 24, so that's really the cheshbon. That's basically the cheshbon. The cheshbon is that if you have a circle that's 24 tvachim in circumference, so maybe it comes out that it's a diameter of 8 tvachim. And if you're going to make a square around this circle, so the square is going to be an 8 by 8 square. And if you have an 8 by 8 square, so the diagonal of that square is going to be 11 1/5. That'll be the cheshbon, 11 1/5, because each tefach by a tefach goes 1 2 tvachim. So maybe when you have 8 tvachim, so 8 tvachim times 1 2/5. I'm sorry, I said 1 2 tvachim. 8 2/5. You say 8 2/5. So it comes out 8 tvachim plus 8 times 2/5 of a tefach, which means 16/5 of a tefach. 16/5 of a tefach is 3 1/5 of tefach. So if you add that to the 8, so it comes out it's 11 1/5 tefach of a tefach is the diagonal of this 8 by 8 square, which means when you go ahead and make this diagonal, which is going to go through the circle, how much is going to be sticking out from the circle on each side? 1 1/2 tvachim and a little bit, and a tenth of a tefach. So 1 1/2 and a tenth. Now 1 1/2 tefach and a tenth is more really than you need for a tefach by a tefach, because a tefach by a tefach, all you need is 1 2/5 of a tefach. So mele, so you know that if you have a circle which is 24, so that's the cheshbon. If you have a omut which is 24 tvachim in circumference, which means it's 8 tvachim in diameter, so that means that in that corner of the square you'll be able to have a tefach by a tefach, which means that they have a tefach by a tefach, berum tefach, and that's an oil. So memela it spreads out the tumah. That's what the Ram says over here. Zeshet tzrichu esim barbot tvachim which are the rules, the mathematical rules that the Chazal will chsemech on. What's the Chazal? Shekol sheyesh bekefish leisha yesh bereicha tefach. We said even though the Rambam is saying that this is what Chazal was saying on. Some people say that even though in Gashmis it seems that it's not like that, but that's a Chazal with Makavos Umeil. That's the halacha that we consider a tefach, even though l'chura since Begashmis the mathematical time is that it's less than a tefach. And lepel you're having something that's a tefach. In other words, it's 3 tvachim in circumference, and Chazal is saying that it has the din of a tefach. So the question is that only lechumra or lekula? But the pashtus, the Rambam doesn't give an art for thinking that it's anything different. Shekol sheyesh bekefish leisha yesh bereichav tefach. V'chol tefach. That's one rule. And another rule is v'chol tefach al tefach b'ribua. Any time that you have a square tefach, is yesh bel chseine tefach shnei chumshin. You're going to have a tefach and 2/5. Lefichach. So therefore, as a result of these two rules, the rule first of all is that you're going to have the diameter is 1/3 of the circumference, and the second rule is that the diagonal is 1 2/5 times of the side of each of the square. Lefichach hoye behekev ha'amud eser b'abor tzvachim is nimtza tachas kol dofnei under the dafen of this eagle. In other words, in other words, the part that's empty, which is near the circle, which is still under the walls of this amud agul, nimtza tachas kol dofnei tefach al tefach merube v'yasim even more, because we're saying that it's more than it because lepel it's a tefach and a half of diagonal, and maybe even a little more than a half. And all you need is a tefach and 2/5 in order for it to have a tefach al tefach merubah. Shachashbein eselu is bekiruvei.